Welcome back to the 150K podcast. I'm your host, Joe Graham, where we help take your dreams to six figures and beyond. Today, I have with me special guest Larry Hagnar of the Dad Edge. Now, I've met Larry through a couple mutual friends, one being Zach Babcock, the other being George Bryant. But Larry, for people that don't know you, don't know your story, and thing, give us a little bit of your background and a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, thanks for having me. And just a slight correction. My last name is pronounced Hagner, and not Hagar. But that's okay. I just want to make sure everybody was clear on it. My background, I'm the host and founder of the Dad Edge. It's a podcast dedicated for men, husbands, and fathers who are basically wanting resources and skills to level up their game as a husband, as a father, their mindset, the whole nine yards. And it is absolutely positively made for the imperfect man, the man who is just trying to do this just a little bit better. And he's taking steps to do so. It's made for the man who is imperfect yet very, very hungry, to live his best life, to create an extraordinary marriage, and to create an incredible connection with his kids that's filled with adventure and memories and just a really good solid life.
Yeah, no, I love that, Larry. I love that. So let's take it this way a little bit. I know that you're an entrepreneur, you've been in business, you've done stuff like that. And this podcast is about breaking that six-figure barrier, but we also know that family life is huge and important. That's why I wanted you on the show. How do you help guys balance that? Because I know, like, especially in the space that I'm in, a lot of guys get into the I'm going to go and build, and they're not always connected as well as they should be with their family, with their wives, with their kids, that type of stuff.
Yeah, so I think the first rule of thumb is to realize there is no balance. And in fact, I would caution your listeners that if anybody out there is selling you a bag of goods that is related to balance as far as like your business, your marriage, and your kids, just run the other direction. It's not possible. However, you can have what I like to call optimization and integration. So what is that? Well, let's just talk about what that means. Let's talk about seasons for a moment. There are going to be seasons in your life where your business is going to require more of your attention than your family. I know that sounds crazy, and I'm not talking about like I'm hours upon hours in the office and you're just die hard neglecting your family. But what I am saying is the pendulum sometimes from a timing perspective is going to swing in that direction just a little bit more. You're still going to spend time with your wife and kids, but it might not be as much. But there are going to be times where you're like, man, I really, in order to scale this business or get it to the next level, I need to log a few extra hours, in the business, this week, this month, this season, right? Now, the thing that you want to make sure of is that doesn't create a total habit, right, around that. There are going to be times where your marriage is absolutely going to require more of your time and attention than your business. And that's okay. If your marriage is in a spot where it needs a little TLC, you better not be spending more hours at the office because
Yeah.
that is not what is needed. And there are also going to be times where the relationship with your kids is just going to require more of you. An example of that is I have a one-on-one client. I make room in my calendar for 4 one-on-one clients per week, and that's it. And as of right now, I'm full, which I'm very blessed to say that. One of my clients, he's 37 years old, highly successful businessman, and just had his first kid 3.5 weeks ago. And his big thing is like, man, I got to get back to work. I got to get back to work. I got to get back to work. And I'm like, listen, hey, man, like, let's pump the brakes here for a second. These first 30, 60, 90 days, your wife is really going to need you.
Yep.
She emotionally needs companionship. She needs that for safety, right? She needs to feel loved. She needs to feel like you guys are arm's length. This kid, like, listen, I've got 4 boys. This kid, I would give anything right now to go back and hold my little baby boy. I can't do that. I was like, your business is going to be just fine. He's been in business for years. His business is scaled to where he really doesn't need to be in it. He just feels he needs to be in it. I told him, I was like, you need to give yourself grace and time. At least take this first 90 days and soak up as much as you possibly can before you get back in the office. I was like, and that's okay to be out of quote unquote balance because that's not what's required of you right now. If your business was dying on the vine, maybe, but it's not. You have people that can run this for you. Your wife needs you, your kids need you, or your son needs you. Let's do that for right now. And so like it's a massive shift for a lot of guys, you know, to understand that, but it's really okay for those things to be a little out of balance and for your time and attention to be put in those areas where it's needed most for that season.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Like I have 3 kids, and I know when my wife had our last one, that first 30 days, like I was a lot more involved than the first 2, because as you get older and you have more kids, you're like, "Oh, wait a minute, I messed this part up. I need to be
Yeah.
more involved and engaged." And yeah, I'm with you as well. I would love to be able to go back. My youngest is 8 now, and go back to when you can just hold them and do all that. But I think you mentioned some super key points there. You don't have to always be focused on one or the other. You need to know what season of life you're in, how you're progressing with that. Um, so as you're going along with this type of thing here, Larry, what would be some other key steps for, we're talking about men here, like you mentioned that guy's first time he's having a kid. Maybe they're dealing with relationships with the wives, because most entrepreneurs are to the extreme, and I understand the balance of it. But what are some key things that men can do to, maybe they've been too far into their business or life, that they can do to, get back engaged with their family?
So great question. I love the question. Here's what I'll tell you. Uh, in order to in order to increase sales in your business, Joe, what do you think is required to increase sales in your business?
Sales wise, well, I'm a salesman, so like prospecting, follow up, closing, relationship. Really, when it comes down to it, building the relationship so that you get
Okay.
more sales.
Is there a skill set in building relationships?
Yes.
Absolutely. Right. So here's what the biggest miss is for men, husbands, and fathers as it relates to their marriage. Okay. A lot of us think, well, I love her, so this should just happen naturally. Like, and or I care about her, we're married, so we should just flourish just because. There's no greater misconception than that. In order to increase sales, right, you have to learn the skill sets of being a good salesperson, right? A good mentor, a good guide, a good teacher. That's a lot of what a salesperson actually does is those things, right? Plus, they're very, very good at communicating and they're very, very good at building trust and relationships. Those things don't happen by accident. They don't happen because we wake up one day and be like, yeah, I feel like doing all those things and it should just come naturally to me. We don't view that as something that we do in our business that should just come naturally. And it's not something we should view that just comes naturally in our marriage. Sorry, not sorry. It just doesn't work that way. A lot of us don't really understand. I was on a huge podcast platform a couple weeks ago with Vince and Adrian Del Monte, and they asked me, they're like, "What's the edge? What is the dad edge?" And I was like, "The edge is skills. That's the edge." I was like, the edge, so as it relates to marriage, right? I'm going to rattle off some things. And if these sound completely foreign, that means you don't know what the skills are. In order to create an extraordinary marriage with elevated communication, with deep intimacy and connection, you have to know skills. So let me give you an example. In order for you to communicate effectively, you have to know what empathy is, not sympathy, what empathy is. You also have to know how to emotionally label your wife. So, I mean, what does that mean? If you come home and say, "How was your day?" And she's like, "Oh my God, today was crazy. I had such a horrible day. And the kid was doing this. And then I got a phone call from that. And I forgot to pay the water bill and blah, blah, blah." What a lot of guys will do is we will rush in, you know, guns blazing and be like, "Well, why are you so upset? That's not such a big deal. Here, let's fix it." And what that does is that completely decimates the intimacy and the connection with your wife. We don't
Yep.
view it that way because that comes from such a good, noble place in men because we are wired to take away pain because we want to protect. We're wired to also problem solve. Like that's what we do. If I come to
Hmm.
you, Joe, and I'm venting about something, right? I'm not looking to vent and for you to just hear me. I'm like, all right, man, like, what do you think I should do? Right.
Yep.
I'm looking for you to
Yep.
help me. I'm looking for advisement. That's not necessarily what our wives are looking for. So one of the things that we can do is just simply, it sounds so simple, but what we do simply is just simply label what you feel that your wife is thinking, or I'm sorry, what she's feeling. So if you come home and she says that, and be like, "Wow, that sounds like an overwhelming day." Who wouldn't be overwhelmed? Tell me more about what happened. Now, what I just did there is I didn't put my Mr. Fix It hat on. I just labeled the emotion that I think she's feeling, which is overwhelm. What I do in that moment is I see you. I heard you. Tell me more. I counted off three things: seen, heard, tell me more, safety. She has three basic needs, right? To feel seen, to feel heard, and to feel safe. When those three needs are fulfilled, she feels really damn good about you and damn good about the marriage. And she's like, oh my gosh, like you're my dream man right now. But you have to do that. That's emotionally labeling. Another thing too is being able to mirror somebody. Mirroring somebody is where you just simply repeat the last three words that she said or three keywords that she said. Anytime you want to use the word why, replace it with mirroring, and I'll tell you why psychologically. So if I come home, same thing. How was your day? Oh my gosh, today was so overwhelming. The kid did this, and I forgot to pay the water bill, and this happened. I feel so overwhelmed right now. Now, if I say, if I want more from her, right? I might be like, so if she says today was crazy. I don't even know how I got through the day. I might just simply say, you don't know how you got through the day? That's it. And what that does to her is she is going to explain more
Hmm.
automatically because she's not going to want the silence, number one. But if I repeat those words back to her, what it triggers in her mind is he heard every single word that I said, so much so that he's using my words versus like, well, why was the day so overwhelming?
Yep.
Now, if I do that, I'm going to get a why. But what I've just done is I pointed the finger at her. I put her in a corner and be like, and I kind of basically said, that doesn't really sound like a big deal to me. Why do you feel that way? Kind of like shame on you in a way, right? And we don't like that. The word why puts us back in our 2-year-old selves when our parents would point at us, be like, why are you doing that? Why are you crying? And it's just it's accusatory. We don't like it. So mirroring is another one. Another one is voice tone. A lot of us bypass this one. How many times have you been in a conversation with somebody, your wife, and she's like, why are you angry? I'm like, well, what? You mean, why am I
Multiple
angry?
times. Yep.
Right. And like, I'm not angry at all. Why would you even ask that? Right. And then, of course, I throw in the why, right? Well, it's the tone in your voice. I don't have a tone in my voice. What do you mean I have a tone in my voice? So, like, I'll give you a perfect example. So, Joe is wearing this headset, right? And in the headset, it looks super high tech. Now, if I use a voice tone of like, Joe, man, dude, what's up with that headset, man? Right? I want you to take in how you feel when I use that voice tone. Like, man, like, tell me about that headset, man. I'd be like, Joe, uh, tell me about the headset, bro.
Yep.
Like, I used the exact same words. What did the first one feel compared to the second?
Yeah. The first one made me feel like you liked it, that you thought it was cool, and it was like, a rad headset. The other one's like, bro, why do you have that on your head? Are you crazy? Yeah. It
Yeah.
was just the tone change.
And I just used the exact same words, right? So those are three skill sets. I'll give you one more. The last one is what we call generative questions. Generative questions are an open ended question that get to someone's soul, okay? To get to someone's gratitude, to get to someone's challenges. And the reason we call it generative questions is because it generates a lot. For the other person, if you ask a very good question, it generates connection. It generates safety. It generates intimacy. It also generates visions and images, gratitude, all kinds of really good feelings. And then the person has to answer you and share what the answer is. So let me give you an example. I say this all the time. My audience is probably sick and tired and blue in the face of me using this same example, but it is very, very simple. And if your listeners are going to walk away with one thing, it's this. The number one question we ask when we come home from work is, how was your day? Let me just let's stake a flag in the ground right now and just commit to saying we're not going to ask that question anymore. It's a shitty question that doesn't require any thought, and it gives the person an easy out to give you a really shitty answer that has basically no thought. When I ask my wife or my kids that, I'll get one word answers: fine, good, busy, crazy, boring.
Yep.
Right? That's what I get. Now, if I flip that around and just say, tell me about something that made you laugh today. And then suddenly the person has to generate ideas, images, and they're thinking about their entire day. Well, man, what did make me laugh? Oh my gosh, like I got to catch up with my friend Jill today, and she told me this really, really funny story about what happened to her because she drank too much wine when she was at this Airbnb this past weekend. And she went to walk out the screen door and slammed right into it and had this huge bloody nose. And I was laughing. So I wasn't laughing at her, but oh my God, it was a funny story. And then suddenly my wife, no matter what mode of mind she's in, I've now elevated her energy and her happiness and even like, and now she's sharing it with me, which elevates our relationship, our connection. And those are the types of questions that are beautiful, right? Another question would be, tell me something I currently do that makes you feel most loved, right? That's a beautiful question because what your wife has to do is think about you and her and all these amazing things that you do. And then she's reliving those and then telling you those. And the beautiful thing that we get to do with that answer is be like, oh, wow, I really know I thought it was, these three things, but it's actually these three things. I'm going to double down on those and make sure I'm doing those more often. So generative questions are such a simple yet overlooked way. The problem is most of us have no clue what they are, how to come up with them. I have a free resource for guys if you're interested. You can just go to thedadedge.com/25 questions, 25 questions. It's called 25 intimate conversation starters, where I train you on why they work so well. And then I give you 25 of them to then go use.
Yeah, no, I love that, Larry, because I think a lot of times, like you said, we go into autopilot or we ask the shitty question like how your day was instead of being intentional. And what I
Right.
heard through that whole thing was being intentional. And like in sales, we talk about this: hear, see, feel. It's the same thing. It's just a different aspect of it because when you're talking with your wife, you're so used to different things that if you don't make it intentional, then it's like you said, you come in and you accuse her, she accuses you, and you're both arguing and you don't even know why you're arguing because you're just, caught up in the mess.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the other thing too. If you don't excuse-
Bless you.
did you see that? Oh
Yep.
my God. Like I knew it was coming. I'm like, wait, hey,
Hey,
almost
real
there.
life happen, real life conversations. It's great.
That's right. Um, but yeah, I actually forgot the question.
We were talking about being intentional and how if you come home and you're just like, hey, how was your day? And you just, take the easy way out instead of being intentional with your wife and developing the relationship and making her feel seen and heard. That was kind of more of what we were talking about with that. And you were going to,
Yeah. Yeah. So, the cool thing about going back to the original question, like what if guys want to double down on their marriage? What if they want to do that? What I have found most of the time is that when men want to double down on their marriage, they'll be like, "Oh, I'm just gonna go do that," or "I'm just gonna be better about that," or "I'm gonna do more of something." I would be very cautious with any of my clients or anybody I work with. I was like, be very cautious of the two words "more" and "better" because there's no way to measure it, and you don't know exactly what you're doing. Like, so I'll give you an example. Let's just say you and your wife don't have the best connection in the world, okay? And let's just say you have an hour of time with her every single night. It's just you guys, right? The kids are in bed and, but instead you watch Netflix for an hour, right? Now, if you were like, I'm going to spend more time with her, and unless you know what more time looks like or what you're going to do at that time, more time doesn't get you anything.
right.
It just gets you more of what is probably already currently happening. So I always tell people, be very, very diligent about learning the skills because once you have the quote unquote more time, or you don't even really need the more time, what you really need is the current time, right? Because you can actually create an incredible connection with your wife in 10 minutes. You really can. You just have to know how to do it. The other thing too is well, I want better communication with her, right? I want better. And but if you really get to the heart of men and challenging them is like, okay, well, what does better look like? Well, we're talking more. Okay, talking more about what? What are you talking more about? Oh, we're just interacting more. About what though? And a lot of times they can't tell me. And what they'll usually default to is like, oh, we'll talk more about like, things we need to do together, like, managing dinners better and managing parenting the kids and doing this. I was like, that's only one of four different pillars in your marriage. You've got your own self-care, you've got partnership, which is what they're hitting on in that moment. Partnership is the business side of marriage. That's the roles, that's the high level managerial things that we're doing. You do this, I do that. This kid's got football, this kid's got piano. We're going here,
Hmm.
we're going there, doing that. That's partnership, and we do spend a ton of time talking about that. In fact, that's the easiest layup conversations to have because we have that stuff in common, but it doesn't provide any intimacy for us. Then you have friendship, which is like, hey, at the end of the day, do I like hanging out with you? Do you like hanging out with me? Do we like going on walks and hikes and just hanging out? And then the fourth one is lovers. And what most of us will do is we'll spend so much time in that partnership loop of talking about these high level managerial things. And then we're wondering, like, well, why is my intimacy not getting any deeper with her? It's because you're talking about the high level managerial things. You're not talking about friendship. You're not talking about lovers. You're talking about these safe things, right?
Hmm.
So that's what I always encourage men is like more time with her and quote unquote better communication or more communication is not going to get you more. You've got to know what to do in those times where you are interacting with her. And if you don't, hey, listen, if you don't know, that's really okay. It's really okay because guess what? We weren't taught. Like we weren't taught this
No.
stuff. You know, last time I looked, emotional IQ, relationship dynamics, communication, intimate communication, none of these things are offered in school and we certainly don't learn them from our parents. However, I always let guys off the hook. If you don't know these things, man, it's not your fault. You're not taught these things. However, if you don't learn them, well, that is your fault
Yeah.
because there are resources now where you can learn, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think, like you said, a lot of times we get it's easy, and because guys are more doers, and we're like we check the little boxes. Well, we talk. Well, maybe like you said, we talk for an hour, but if you don't talk about what stirs her heart, what makes her happy, what dreams and plans she has compared to, did you pay the bills? Oh, you took the kid here or there. That's yeah. It's I think learning to cultivate the relationship and actually hearing our wives instead of it being that business thing, and they're like, "Well, why am I not getting any intimacy now? We've spent 3 hours together." Well, yeah,
Yeah.
you didn't cultivate it at all. You didn't take her out on a date. You didn't do anything fun. You didn't get her away from the kids. Like, I was thinking about this the other day. My wife homeschools what she wants to do, and with our youngest, and she gets really, really busy. And what I found that she needs sometimes is just space. Like yesterday, she just wanted space. So I had little in the bedroom. I was in the front room. I just gave her like 3 hours of space, but that's what she wanted. Is finding what they actually need so that when you're in communication, then you can be intimate. And I think that's something that us guys mess up a lot of times.
Oh, we totally do. Yeah. And that's the thing though. We don't know that stuff and we don't know what we don't know. That's why I'm always very empathetic to men, you know, when they come and work with us. Cause like we'll ask them, like, hey, where are you at with these things and what's your understanding of them? And usually it sounds to them, it sounds very foreign. And that's really okay. As long as you're willing to learn. I mean, because the skills actually aren't hard to learn. But once you're willing to learn them, that's when your life really does change.
Yeah, and again, and then it's just the practicing and getting
Right.
into the conversations and all of that. Now, I also know you do a lot with your kids and all. Like you did the bodybuilding with your one son. You've done some other stuff. How has your relationship with your kids changed as you've built this business and become a man and learned more over time?
I honestly couldn't imagine what my relationship with my kids would be without doing this work. And I say that because I've got a really good relationship with all four of my boys. And I would say I always like to talk about the older two, the 14 and the 16-year-old, because they're teenagers. And stereotypically, you know, people always tell me, oh, wait till they get to the teenage years. You know, they're not going to want anything to do with you. They're not going to tell you anything. They're always going to lie to you. You know, they're going to want to be out with their friends. My two teenagers are homebodies. And my 16-year-old, my 16-year-old, his two favorite words, let's talk. I love that. We talk every single night for probably 10 to 30 minutes about his day and stuff like that. And I'll share with you something that happened this past weekend. My wife was out of town and it was just me. She had the littles, my 8-year-old and my 6-year-old. I had the bigs, which is the 16, 14-year-old. And my 16-year-old was gone all day on Saturday. He had a band competition and then he went to a breakfast place with his friends late at night. And he came home and he's like, "Hey, can we talk?" Which is not uncommon. He asked me that every night. I'm like, "Of course you can." I was getting ready for bed and he's like, "I really need to talk about something that happened today." And I'm like, "Okay, what's up?" And he basically laid out, he's like, I really don't like how my friends act sometimes. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, we were at this restaurant. He's like, it was IHOP. He's like, they were talking really loud and they were using, they were cursing a lot. And he's like, I could tell I was looking around at the other families and stuff like that, that I knew we were bothering people. He's like, so I just kind of put my head down and didn't say anything. And then finally the manager came over and basically told us, if you guys don't quiet down, you're out of here.
Mhm.
And I was like, interesting. I was like, and I was, it was, he didn't have to tell me that, right? Because if anything, a lot of times kids have fear of like, well, well, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? Or what, it's like kind of like these shaming and these pain things, right? And I was just like, dude, I was like, hey, thanks for telling me that. I was like, I'm sure that probably took a little courage. I was like, but, and then what I do is I just simply reflect back to him and just say, well, how do you feel about that? I was like, well, because we've all talked about like, even though you weren't engaging in it, however, you're one of the 7 kids who are there. So if 6 of you are in trouble, you're in trouble too.
Yep.
Like you're just guilty by association. Doesn't matter if you did it or not. He's like, yeah, I know. And then he told me about a friend of his and how he likes to speed really bad when he's driving. And I'm like, well, that's not really safe. I was like, and then we talked about like how he can be the man who speaks up, right? And basically is confident with it and that kind of thing. But here's what I'll tell you. I've created this environment with my kids, which is another skill set that we teach in marriage and with parenting, which is creating an environment of psychological safety. Creating an environment of psychological safety is, and if you don't know what that is, let me just give you a quick reference point. If you've ever been in a conversation and somebody just stopped talking and looked at you and said, I don't know what it is about you, but I feel like I can tell you anything. Or flip side, you've ever told somebody that, there's an environment of psychological safety that you either set up and you probably didn't know it, or the other person did. And usually what happens is the person who's listening to whatever it is that you're saying is creating this environment where they're just listening to you in this judgment-free zone. They're probably being very empathetic with you and they're labeling some of the things that they're hearing and motions and that kind of thing, but they're not judging you, they're not lecturing you, and they're just simply asking you questions to get you to talk more. Usually creating an environment of psychological safety, you don't have to talk very much at all. You just have to be the one who's the warm ear listening and being empathetic and reflecting back. Most people don't know that. I've used that skill set a lot with my boys, and they do tell me, like, there are some things that my boys tell me, and I'll just be like, I cannot believe
Mhm.
he just told me that. So I'll tell you that if you want to create this connection with your kids, it's very similar to marriage, that it takes these skill sets to do it. And here's the funny thing. If you really want to elevate your marriage, the same skills apply for your kids because your kids have the same 3 basic needs as your wife does: to feel seen, to feel heard, and to feel safe. That's your kids' 3 basic needs as long as your wife, right? Obviously, the level of intimacy is a bit different, but the skills are the same. But where would I be without Dad Edge? I would be divorced. I would have 2 boys, not 4, and my 2 older boys probably wouldn't want much to do with me. I would probably be on my 2nd, maybe 3rd marriage at this point. I'm not kidding. And I'd be insanely unhappy and lost. And I probably would have an ego that would protect me from why it was somebody else's fault and not mine. That's probably where I'd be. I'm not kidding.
No, no, I believe you. Like I understand that, and I want to touch on that, but I want to go back to what you mentioned about doing the safety thing with your kids and all. I had a buddy of mine tell me this when I was younger, like a young man. He said, "Hey, date your kids as well." So, like, I took all my little ones from when they were really young, and once a week we would go out to McDonald's, wherever, and I'd let them talk to me about anything. Now, my oldest daughter is 20. She tells me about her boyfriends. That level of connection you mentioned, that hit home. But I think a lot of
Yeah.
guys, we don't always know, like, my dad he was a working dad. He would do the work stuff, but that was it. And I love him. Like, we have a great relationship now, but when we were kids, that's what he would do. So I love this whole setup of, being intimate with them, talking with them, doing that aspect of it. Um, so how do guys who maybe they have kids that are a little bit older, but they have not established that, what would be some key steps that they could do, or girls, because I'm sure there's girls listen to as well, that they can interact with their kids better, or maybe start opening the doors with their kids because maybe again they thought I'm supposed to provide, but they're not as engaged as they wanted to be.
So I will tell you, first of all, let me answer the question that I think comes before this question first, which is how do I create an environment where I don't have to worry about backtracking and then suddenly scrambling to make this connection. Here's what I'll tell you. We don't go, 20,000 miles in a car without getting an oil change. There's preventative maintenance. There are things that we do. Our entire lives, are centered around a lot of preventative maintenance. You don't go to the dentist every 5 years. You go to the dentist every 6 to 9 months, right?
Hmm.
Keep your
Yep.
teeth in working order, right? You go get a physical every year. You get your blood work done or at least you should be. You get your car, your tires rotated. You get all these things done. Your kids and those relationships, man, they're the exact same thing. So what I will tell you, I started off with my kids very young, like date nights and one-on-one time and conversations. And here's what I'll tell you. Let's just talk about kids under the age of 10, right? Do whatever it is that br- allow them to bring you into their world.
Hmm.
So like I love date nights, and date nights are more than just activity, and it's about conversation, it's about memories, it's about generative questions, right? So like for instance, if I have right now my 8-year-old, he just loves soccer all of a sudden, just out of nowhere. He's never been really into sports at all, but loves soccer. Well, lately he's like, "Hey dad, can we go up to, the high school and kick the ball around?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then after that, you want to go get like a milkshake? Yeah. So like we'll go up there and as we're knocking the soccer ball around, like I'll ask him, be like, dude, like what was the best part of your day today? Like what was something funny that happened to you today, right? What was something that you failed at today? What'd you learn, right? And we'll do this stuff and we'll have fun and we'll do an activity and then we'll go out for a milkshake. I'll ask him more questions and we'll joke around. Maybe we'll bring like an Uno card deck, to play Uno or something else. Just something to just basically symbolize I'm interested in you. I'm here for you, and nothing else in the entire world matters,
Yep.
right? So that's kids under 10. Your teenagers, this one is a bit more tricky, especially if you don't have the connection. Now, here's what I'll tell you. I always like doing something physically active with my kids because what it does is it breaks down the barriers, right? I'll give you an example. If I want to have a heart to heart with my 14-year-old son, he loves Starbucks and he loves Frappuccinos. But if I go right in for the Starbucks and the Frappuccino and we're sitting face to face, nose to nose, toes to toes, and I start talking to him, he's not going to really open up to me.
Right.
And I have experience with that. I know that. Now, if we go and we hit the gym because he loves fitness,
Hmm.
or if we go play a couple games of tennis and neither one of us are good at it, but we just love to play, and we'll go play tennis. We get some laughs in, and then we go to Starbucks. It is amazing. It is night and day, the conversation and the energy and the connection, versus if I go in cold and I try to just take him out somewhere and have a talk with him. If I do something active with him to bring connection to us, to bring laughter to us, to have an experience between the two of us, my conversation with him is going to be much more fulfilling than not. And usually what I'll do is again, you have to allow them to bring you into their world. So I'll give my kids choices like, "Hey man, like it's been a while since we've kind of hung out. I'd like to take you out on Wednesday night. Do you want to go play tennis or do you want to go to the firing range? And then we'll go grab dinner. Which one would you like to do?" And he'll tell me, he'll be like, "I really want to go play tennis." I'm like, "All right, cool. We'll go play tennis." I don't care what we do. I really don't, as long as we're doing something. But, being very creative with your questions. And I also would anytime you want to be the guru and advise your teenager on the life that they're not living or the life that they should be living, and instead ask them questions to get them to talk, right? So if they start talking about like I've had my 14-year-old talk about some of the experiences he's had with kids and that he runs with that unfortunately are getting into bad stuff.
Hmm.
Like one of them was he doesn't hang out with the group anymore, but when he did, he'd be like, "Yeah, like we were at Walmart and so and so wanted to shoplift, or now so and so is vaping, now so and so is stealing his dad's beer." And instead of like coming down on him like a wrath, I'd be like, "What's your stance on that?" And he'll tell me, and he wants no part of that stuff. Like, well, let me ask you this. If you had an opportunity to sit down with your friend who is stealing and you were to advise him, what would you tell him? And sometimes just putting them in that situation of like, what would you tell them? A lot of times, whatever lecture that I think is so incredible and game changing, he's got a much better message than I do.
Hmm.
And most importantly, he's the one articulating it. So he's the one who's learning it as he's teaching it to me, which is way more impactful than me telling him what he should be doing or telling him what he should do in that situation.
Yeah, I love that because you're empowering them, you're guiding them, but you're making it to where they feel a part of it. Kind of even
Exactly.
from the men do stuff together. So you're getting them to let his guard down by getting active and physical. Then you're opening the door, but you're not like, you have to do this. You're like, hey, what are you? That's huge. I think that's like a game changer.
I think the conversation is like getting them to talk and articulate, because here's the cool thing too. If I tell him what I think he should tell his friend, the chances of him remembering it are not very high. The If he is the one that articulates it, the chances of him remembering it are very high. And if he gets the opportunity to have a one-on-one with his friend, he's already had a role play.
Yep.
He already has a really good idea of what he would say, right? And the likelihood of that conversation happening is probably going to be higher.
Yeah, I love that. And we're not done, Larry, but just so people who
Yeah.
are listening, maybe they want to find you. I like to put it in the middle of the show, just that way they don't hop off at the end. Where can people find you at?
You can find everything we're doing at thedadedge.com. Everything I do is the Dad Edge on Instagram and website and all that. I'm not hard to find. So even if you just Google the Dad Edge, I'll come right up.
Awesome. Thank you, my friend. So let's talk a little bit about podcasting as well. Like we talked about family, we talked about kids, we talked about relationships and all. But you are coming up on, I think it's what, almost 1,000 episodes. You're in the 900s, are you not, for the Dead Edge?
I think we're like right at 1,000. Yeah.
Yeah, that is crazy. So how have you had the capacity to keep doing that? Like, because I mean, most podcasters stop after 8, 15 is like you're getting in the top 5%. Has it been the driving factor of just helping men and families, or what's made you be this consistent?
That's a really good question. I've never in 7 years, I've never missed one podcast episode, not one deadline ever. I To be honest, I think it comes from a very selfish place and unselfish place. The selfish place means when I interview somebody, I view it as a beautiful learning experience. So, like for instance, if I get to sit down and have a conversation with Jocko Willink about the dichotomy of extreme ownership and leadership and how it relates to parenting and marriage and mindset, I'm I take that as a privilege and an honor. I don't want to not do that, because one of the coolest things about this seat that I sit in, I view it as the front row to a education that I is invaluable, right? We can all go out and get degrees and certifications, and that's all important and all fine and well, but this is life lessons, and I am hungry. I am a life learner, man. Like and there's no off switch for that for me. So for me, the podcast, every single podcast guest that I've come across, I've learned one new thing at least, or I've tweaked one new thing that I already learned from maybe somebody else, and maybe it's like lesson 2.0 for that, right? So it is a constant, if you look at Stephen Covey and the 7 habits of highly effective people, the last one is keep the sword sharp,
Hmm.
right? Always, or I think he says sharpen the saw
Yeah.
regularly. The podcast has become the way I sharpen my own saw. It's I get to have all these amazing conversations, get to learn. And then the cool thing about being a podcaster, as you know, is the audience gets to learn right along with you. They get to go with you for the ride. So that's why I say it's a very selfish thing, but it's also unselfish, because I want to give it to as many men who are willing to listen and want to learn as well.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that a lot. I think my thought process is the same with coming up, like I said, on my 100th episode, getting to talk to different people is like, you get to ask questions and you get their 100% attention, which is crazy cool. Because a lot of times, you can't just go to an event or meet someone and like you're not going to just get to talk to Jocko randomly, but because you have a platform he can help people on, you get to do that. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, that's true.
What do you have any like favorite guests that you've had on your podcast? And I know you love all your guests, so don't take it that way, but anyone that just stands out more?
Yeah, I have really there's been quite a few that I've just really, really loved. I really liked interviewing Matthew McConaughey. And it's a lot of it was just because he's Matthew McConaughey. And, just being able to for me, that interview was really cool because number one, I loved his book. I thought his book was so good, Green Lights. But number two, for me, interviewing Matthew McConaughey, it was such an amazing stamp of validation and proof that that this platform has literally helped me have conversations with people that I otherwise never would have even seen, right, or spoken to. And it's also been really cool, and I'll use Matthew as an example as well, is because Matthew came on the podcast and he was so authentic and so real, just an everyday dude. Matthew could have said anything and we all would have believed it.
Hmm.
Anything. And here's one of the coolest things about what Matthew said when I asked him a question. I asked him a question about marriage, about with him and Camilla. And I asked him, I was like, hey man, I was like, how does Matthew McConaughey keep his marriage on point? How do you constantly date and pursue Camilla? And that guy could have said any BS answer
Hmm.
and we all would have believed him. And here's what Matthew said. He kind of like got uncomfortable. And you could see it in the YouTube video. He kind of was like, he's like, you know what? He goes, as you asked me that question, I'm realizing I've been really bad about that lately. He's like, I've been so busy with Sing 2, we're getting ready to launch that. And he's like, I've been so busy with, a couple other roles that I'm looking at. We're traveling and the kids have activities. And he's like, I've really kind of put my marriage on the back burner this season a little bit, if I'm really being honest with myself. He goes, and that question really poses, this thought process in me that I need to take my wife out on a date this week. And I was just like, I was stunned. I was stunned at that authenticity and I thanked him for it. I was like, dude, you could have said anything. We would have believed you. I was
Hmm.
like, that's just proof though, man, that like, and that goes back to your original question. Work is going to take some of your time, more time than what you want. Your marriage is going to take more time than what now he's in that season where he's like, oh, he's like, I got to put work on the back burner a little bit and put my wife on the front. So, he was definitely one. I just loved his story, how fascinating it was. Plus, it was a bit nostalgic for me too because I took my wife first date my wife and I went on was a Matthew McConaughey movie back in college, Time to Kill. So it was really
Nice.
cool. It was very iconic, and she got to meet him too during that interview. Another beautiful interview was Nikki Six from Motley Crue. That one, my expectations, no offense, Nikki, my expectations were very low because I was just like, this is a hard rocker who was on drugs for years, died twice, came back to life. Like this guy's gonna be so ate up, and it's gonna be ridiculous. Probably one of my most favorite interviews because Nikki Six is a brilliant man, and he's been sober for 21 years, and he was so on point with just some of his answers and imperfections. And I had my 16-year-old son be a part of that interview. And I told my son, I was like, you've got the last question. And I told him, I was like, I don't want to know what it is, but you've got the last question. So I asked Nikki, I was like, hey man, I was like, Ethan's got the last question for you. You down with that? He's like, oh my gosh, of course I am. Let's hear it, man. What do you got, Ethan? And I didn't know what Ethan was going to ask. And Ethan goes, what advice do you have for kids in my generation to live a good life? And I was sitting here thinking, like, oh my God, what is Nikki Six going to say? Because my son, who like worships 80s rock and he loves Motley Crue and he loves Nikki Six, oh my God, buckle my shoelaces or buckle my seatbelt and tie my shoelaces. Here we go. And Nikki just thought for a second. He's like, that's a really good question, Ethan. He goes, all right, here's the answer. I'm going to give you a shotgun blast to the face. He goes, when I was your age, Ethan, he goes, we used to sneak beer from my friend's fridge, the dad's fridge. He's like, we would smoke weed here and there. He's like, I would highly advise you not doing any of that. He goes, and here's why. The drugs that your generation is facing versus mine, they'll kill you. He's like, I can't even tell you how many times I read in my local newspaper of, like these youth athletes who tried weed for the first time and it was laced with fentanyl and they died. They die. He's like,
Yeah.
Ethan, they die. He's like, so I want you to really hear it from me that if you're around a group of people that are doing drugs and drinking, I'd take a really good look at that group of friends and find yourself a new group of friends. He's like, because drugs this day and age, your generation, they don't mess around. And I was just like, holy crap. I was like, I just want to reach through the screen and give that man a hug. So I was like,
Yeah.
you basically saved me, like, because he's always going to remember that. So Nikki Six, John Cooper from lead singer of Skillet, he was awesome. I loved interviewing him. Greg Olson, who legendary football
Mhm.
player, now a broadcaster as well. He just had a story that, my God, it would have made you cry with his son TJ and needing a heart transplant. And those have been some of by far my favorites.
No, that's awesome. That's very cool. So I want to end with one question. I like to ask this question. It's a little bit out there, but I think you'll like it. And it kind of will tie into what you're talking about. So you can go in the past as far as you want. You can go in the future as far as you want. You get to go and spend it with one person for a year and then bring that knowledge back here. Where would you go? Who would you spend the time with?
Wow. I mean, I'm a faith-based person, so I would go back and to the time of Christ, and I'd want to watch all that unfold. Even become a follower of some kind. He already had his 12, so I don't think he had room for a 13th or anything like that. But I would really want to meet him and talk to him and understand his beliefs and understand why he was doing what he was doing and just be able to ask him questions that I knew from the future that perhaps a lot of people back then had no clue about. Um, but yeah, that's where I'd want to go.
No, I love that. I love that. Any other words of wisdom, thoughts that we maybe didn't touch on in the podcast that you want to leave with the audience?
No, I think I think we really hit it home, but I think it really boils down to, if you don't know a lot of these things, these skill sets that we talked about in this show, as it relates to creating more intimacy and connection with your wife, creating a better connection with your kids, your own mindset and that kind of thing, it's really okay if you don't know it. However, I would encourage you, if you're really wanting that edge that we talked about, if you really want to live that life that is legendary. I say it all the time, live legendary, legacy is forever. Here's what I want men to really think. First of all, let me go back real quick. If you don't know these skills, that's really okay, but it's really important for you to learn them, right? And now you have the opportunity to do so, and you know where to find them. But here's the other thing that I'll tell you. Really, a good litmus test for me, and I've used this with my clients, is if you were to die today, would you have any regrets? Are you, have you lived this life where you've been like, hey, I am all in. Like, I am all in. Like, there's nothing left on it. Like, I'll be very honest. If I died tomorrow, and if someone told me you're gonna die today, tomorrow, I'd be like, that sucks, but I'm not scrambling to do anything I haven't done. I feel really good about leaving what I've left on the table. On the flip side, if you're like, I really feel like I'm in that drift. And the drift is what I'll call the wash, rinse, repeat. It's everything is fine, good, busy. You're leaving a crap ton on the table as it pertains to your mindset, your physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health, your marriage, connection with your kids, maybe some more leadership skills that you could learn. You're leaving a lot on the table. If you have that feeling, I'm leaving a lot on the table, you got to get busy living, my friend. To quote Morgan Freeman from Shawshank, get busy living or get busy dying, one of the two. And luckily, what I'll tell you is the guys that do life with us, man, we get busy living because we don't want guys going to their grave with regret. We want guys going to their grave, to their deathbed with a smile on their face, be like, job well done. Looked good. It wasn't always sunshine and rainbows, but mission accomplished.
I love that, Larry. Thank you again for being on the show. I appreciate you, my friend. And for all of those of you listening, share this with the dads you know. Pretty much any dad you know, share this episode. They need to hear this. And until next time, like Larry says, be legendary.